Now, I have to admit to you all here that I was wrong. I made a video about a year or so ago exclaiming that Symbolic was a melodic death metal record, and well, guys, I was wrong. I need to correct the record here. So, what exactly is Symbolic then if it's not melodic death metal? Well, you guys can read the title of this video. It's my opinion, and I've been ruminating over this for way too long, that Symbolic is its own little subgenre. It's symbolic metal. That's what makes it so hard to find anything that sounds like it, right? So what is symbolic metal, you ask? Well, let me explain. Well, hello, my friends. We meet again. It has been a while. Where should we begin? Yes, another video from Varvis talking about death. What else is new? Well, what else is new is that my new band Mistea just dropped a music video, our first single. You guys should go check it out. Link down below. I think you may just like it if you like death and symbolic stuff. Full album drops August 1st, Morningside, Mistea. Make sure you like it and go subscribe. Check it out, get hype, boys. Okay, on to the video though. Now, the first question is, well, who the hell cares about any of this anyway? Well, I don't know, man. You clicked on the video, so you tell me. Besides, mankind's desire to classify and organize the material world into discrete categories is very, very strong, and it's very, very strong in me. And you know what, buddy? I care. So, when you look on the website RYM, Symbolic is first listed as a technical death metal.
Technical death metal.
With progressive metal and melodic death metal listed as secondaries, which I guess kind of makes sense, but I truly kind of fundamentally disagree with the tech death album label here. It almost feels like they had nothing else to put, so that's what they put. I don't actually think this album is all that technical at all, and I know that is because I can play most of this album on guitar, and I suck.
Years and years of shatter, souls that were lost. The power of fragile.
Gene Hoglan actually would comment on this too.
That's where, Symbolic was starting to take on a little bit more of a traditional metal feel to it. And the riffs were, not all that technical. A lot of guitarists could sit down, play a lot of that symbolic material just right out the gate.
So yeah, to me, human individual thought patterns, and honestly even the sound of Perseverance, I can actually see as technical death metal, but symbolic, I just don't really hear it. Progressive metal, okay, I can get behind this label. Although I would argue that structure-wise, death songs are sort of anything but progressive. They all, especially on Symbolic here, they all follow the same structure to a T almost. But nonetheless, I can hear it as a secondary category, sure, right?
Other times, knowing too much.
Okay, melodic death metal, melodic death metal, right? There was enough of that to sort of convince me to make an entire video about it, but the more I listen to it, the more the melodic death metal sections, I don't know, it just doesn't really sound like any other melodic death metal album. Like there's melody here, but it's not the main course. It's like a side dish, you know what I mean? To me, it is actually very, very simple what it is. Symbolic is its own thing. It's symbolic metal. I'm inventing this little new sub-genre right now. Symbolic metal, to put it simply, is heavy metal with harsh vocals. That's it. That's what Symbolic is, right? It's simply a heavy metal record, but instead of a singer who sings melodies and clean singing lines, you have Chuck Schuldiner doing his harsh vocals. Now, if you guys want to see me do a video on the vocal style of Chuck on this album, let me know. It is actually really, really unique, and it's about as close as screaming can get to singing without having tonal notes to it, so just let me know down below. Now, Chuck actually laid this out over 30 years ago for us, and here are some quotes. I'm not schizomaxing about this. In an interview with 1995 Rock Out Censorship magazine, quote, "That's where my roots are in really heavy stuff like Iron Maiden, Judas Priest, and a lot of bands from the early 80s, as well as the heavy stuff like other bands that inspired us were Venom, early Slayer, stuff like that. And I think our roots are coming out a lot more," end quote. Right here we have him moving towards that classic heavy metal sound, his roots, which would still still be melodic, right? Old heavy metal still melodic, but it still has some of those non-diatonic crunchy intervals in it, right? And if you read any of the interviews from around 1995, Chuck is doing his absolute best to not say that it's not a death metal album anymore, but to essentially say that same thing without outwardly saying it, if that makes any sense. Here's another quote from 1995. "I'm trying to break down barriers commonly associated with this style of music. I'm tired of labels and tags, so-called limits or other bothersome cliches used to describe Death's music. Quote, I still want Death to be remembered as a metal band first and foremost, though it's up to critics and journalists to further classify us as so." I think there's so many classifications and categories that go hand in hand with a specifically targeted genre music. I'd like to avoid that if at all possible, but as you know, it's extremely difficult, end quote. So there you go. He essentially just states that he thinks that's no longer a death metal band, a death metal record. And honestly, I would argue besides vocal style that there isn't much death metal kind of left in Symbolic. And of course, one of the biggest indicators of his true inner thoughts around the whole thing is the infamous fallout with Roadrunner Records, where he was absolutely furious and irate that Death was advertised alongside some other death metal bands' albums in 1995. Like I think it was Morbid Angel's Domination and some other records like that. He was furious about that, right? He specifically told Roadrunner Records that list me beside heavy metal records, not death metal. So that should show you kind of what he was aiming for right there. All right, so okay, let's break down then what exactly symbolic metal is and see if you can find any other records or bands that fit this mold.
To the emptiness of time. To the left.
One of the comparisons in my mind, which always comes back to me when I listen to this, is Judas Priest's Painkiller. You take that album and simply replace Rob Halford's great singing with harsh vocals, and essentially you have what Symbolic was trying to do, right?
Stuck in distinction. Don't look me. Maybe the pure. Sacred is thee. If that they have.
You have several melodic sections next to these chunkier, groove-laden riffs, next to these crunchy intervals, you know, more heavy metal riffs. True to his word, right? Symbolic really seems to take a lot of influence from all these 80s heavy metal bands and digests all of it and all of their sound together and churns out a masterpiece like Symbolic, which includes all these various influences, but still remains kind of a pure heavy metal record riff-wise, in my opinion. Now, Painkiller to me is basically as close to extreme metal as a heavy metal record could be. It sort of has like one foot in it, right? And Symbolic is like the opposite of that. As non-extreme as an extreme metal record could be. That's what Symbolic metal is, right? It's heavy metal with harsh vocals. You have one foot in each world, basically. All right, so I hope this is all making sense so far. So let's sort of break down the term, what symbolic metal actually does and what Symbolic itself is actually trying to do. Break it down into more detail. What exactly makes an album symbolic metal here, guys? Okay, so first of all, symbolic metal records have their vocal style, or at least a large majority of it, in harsh vocals. This is sort of the most important part. This is where the buck stops, right? If there's more clean vocals or more than just a little smattering of it, then it just becomes something else. Normal heavy metal, whatever.
Inside Crystal Mountain, evil takes its form.
I might also add here that the focus is also on vocal hooks, right? You go listen to Symbolic, there's many vocal hooks as there are riff hooks. Just think of how many cool vocal moments, you know, Inside Crystal Mountain, Misanthrope, Empty Words, Zero Tolerance, like these are all very, very vocal forward, vocally focused, hooky songs.
Living in the pupil of 1,000 eyes.
Much more, I would argue, than pretty much any others in all of Death's catalog, maybe even including The Sound of Perseverance, honestly. Sort of unlike a lot of other extreme metal where the harsh vocals almost simply act like texture, Symbolic, again, has the vocals forward. They're very clear, they're concise. You could hear what he's trying to say, and they're hooks in themselves, right? They're leading hooks in the song. So we can refine this to harsh vocals with a focus on songwriting and using the harsh vocals as hooks. Now, what about riffage? Symbolic itself contains a huge variety of riffing styles. You know, we have fast trim pick melodic stuff, pedal tone riffs, super crunchy evil riffs. Trem pick death metal kind of stuff, traditional power chord stuff, groove metal sections. Essentially, Symbolic doesn't lean too far in any direction, any sort of subcategory. It's sort of in like this Goldilocks zone for riffage. You know, there's just so many different riffage styles on display here. Again, it's similar to Painkiller, right? So we can bring this back down and simplify and say that riffage is a strong focus of these songs, but it doesn't lean any too far in one direction. It's more traditional heavy metal, right? Maybe you could say traditional heavy metal riffs, maybe a smattering of some other extreme stuff. That's what the guitars do in Symbolic. Focused on harmonies too. Death, right? We always have those famous fifth harmonies, perfect fifth harmonies, right? But you know, you can throw in the Iron Maiden thirds, all that good stuff. Now, rhythm section, I find next to vocal style, the rhythm sections really determine metal subgenres. And Gene Hoglan's performance on Symbolic to me just remains a high watermark in all of metal in terms of creativity, groove, accenting, and just pure power. Again, you know, Gene never leans too far in any one direction either, right? Kind of a Goldilocks zone of drumming, but still has that aggression and power, which makes extreme metal extreme. So basically, as long as the drums just aren't blasting away the whole time or just playing AC/DC beats, you'll be fine, right? That's what makes Symbolic metal, I guess. So in short, Symbolic metal is a refinement of extreme metal, which sees the bands lean heavily into the hook-laden riff style of 80s heavy metal bands like Iron Maiden, Judas Priest, Merciful Fate, while retaining the harsh vocals of the late 80s extreme metal scene. These vocals, however, are used in similar fashion to older traditional heavy metal bands as vocal hooks, right? Rather than the sort of smattering of vocals over top of these riffs, right? Symbolic metal bands have 1 foot in extreme metal and 1 foot into heavy metal. So it's bridging the gap, I guess. So I hope I have laid out a convincing case for you guys here. Okay, now what about other Symbolic metal bands or records? First of all, I would tentatively put The Sound of Perseverance on here. To me, that album is much more extreme than Symbolic, but some of those songs still retain this harsh vocal hooks of the more traditional riffing style on songs like Spirit Crusher.
No guilt, it means simply fight spirit.
You know, one of the first albums which came to my mind which thinking of this is the band Sentence, the Finnish band, and their 1995 album Amok. Now, ironically, actually, this album came out shortly before Symbolic in 1995. This came out in January. But I really hear this album as a heavy metal record with harsh vocals. Right now, of course, there's some bits of clean singing here and there and some keyboard parts. But to me, Sentence is Amok right here is another really great example of Symbolic metal. This is a heavy metal record with harsh vocals. So if you're interested in a video on these guys, leave that down below. Very, very interesting and unique band. And Sentence were in this great transitional period with Amok here. And it seems like a lot of these albums I'm going to be listing here are in other transitional periods from other bands, right? You sort of accidentally land in this middle zone before you move to something else. Now, don't laugh, but Thornography by Cradle of Filth is another album which I find fits the bill. You know, it has all of like the typical Cradle of Filth quirks, but to me, at its core, this is a pretty much a heavy metal record with Danny Filth's often strange, harsh vocal styles plastered over top of it in hook-style fashion. And honestly, I enjoy this record much more than the few albums before it or after it. Again, another transitional album for the band. This is heavy metal with harsh vocal hooks and some keyboards and opera vocals, whatever. Great album, although Midian still remains the GOAT. Now, in a similar vein, I would also put Children of Bodom's Are You Dead Yet as another example of this, right? This time, the sound here is very much keyboard dominant. But to me, this is another example of a band transitioning from one period to the next and sort of landing in the sweet Goldilocks spot of heavy metal with harsh vocals. Symbolic metal. Pure banger album, And this album is here is where you could really hear Alexi and the band focusing on vocal hooks more so ever than previous albums before. Great album. Lamb of God, Sacrament, and I suppose you could probably also throw in Ashes of the Wake here as well. Now, these albums perhaps a little bit more groove metal and metalcore influence than the others rather than heavy metal. But the focus on these harsh vocal hooks over top of much more catchy heavy riffs really make these two albums stand out to me as symbolic metal records as well. Great records there. Okay guys, so what other records would you consider to be symbolic metal? Please leave them down below, as I am honestly really curious. I love this style of heavy metal, whatever you want to call it. And it's so hard to find anything that sounds like symbolic because it's its own little subgenre, it's its own little category, right? You know, that's what makes it so hard to find stuff. Like there's a couple things like everybody always recommends Martyrs 1997 album, but that's like, that leans too far into the extreme metal zone of it, right? Whereas I kind of want to see stuff going the other way. That's why Sentence Amok is such an interesting album for me. It's right in that sweet Goldilocks zone of symbolic metal. Or I guess maybe you'd call it Goldilocks metal. Anyways, do you guys agree with me? Do you think I'm schizomaxing here? I'd love to hear what albums you consider to be symbolic metal. I've been Varvis. Cheers.